No. It's okay. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I'd like to welcome you all to the third session of this welcoming Ramadan program. And inshallah, today we're going to be covering some contemporary issues related to our fasts. And also, we're going to talk about, inshallah, certain issues that have come up in light of the coronavirus. And so with the masjids being shut down, many of you have a lot of questions related to Ramadan during this time. So inshallah, we're going to try to cover those as well. And with me are Sheikh Kamil to my right and Sheikh Nu'man to my left. And inshallah, we will also be taking your questions. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below and we will get to them, inshallah. In the last session, we had spoken about the nullifiers of the fast. And from them, we had mentioned that when it comes to things entering your mouth, that those invalidate your fast, such as food and water and anything you have to drink or eat. And inshallah, today we're going to talk about a few other issues that are related to this, that some scholars believe to also fall in the same category as that. And so certain issues that might be ambiguous to a lot of us, do they fall in that same category as eating and drinking, or do they not? Inshallah, we will discuss that in today's session, because if they do fall in the same category, we say that they have the same ruling as that of food and water, food and drinks, and that means that it invalidates your fast. But if it doesn't take the same ruling, then this would not be something that invalidates your fast. And so, one of the questions that a lot of people ask during the month of Ramadan, or even during their regular fasts, is related to brushing their teeth. And we know that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our source of guidance through which Allah Azza wa Jal revealed to us the Quran and the guidance of Islam, when he used to fast, he would actually use what's called the siwak or the miswak, the stick to clean his teeth. And although there are certain scholars who set a time limit for that, you can do it before, a certain time, but you can't use it in the latter part of the time, it wasn't related to it breaking your fast, but it was more so to do with the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he had said that the smell that comes from the mouth of someone who is fasting is more beloved to Allah Azza wa Jal than the smell of musk. And the reason for that is not because it's a foul smell that Allah Azza wa Jal likes foul things, but it means that this smell that has originated from our mouth or from our stomach, it's there because we're doing something to please Allah Azza wa Jal. And so when we do something to please Allah Azza wa Jal, whatever the ramifications of that action might be, even that is beloved to Allah Azza wa Jal. And so certain scholars, they said that in the latter part of your fast, we don't recommend that people use the siwak so that you could still have that smell in your mouth. And Allahu A'lam, the correct opinion is that the smell that is being spoken about is not the smell that comes from your mouth when it hasn't been cleaned, but it's as a result of your stomach being empty. And when your stomach is empty, it doesn't have any food in there. The gases and the other things that are in your stomach, the smell starts to come out from your mouth. And so this is the khaluf. This is the smell that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about. So now if it's okay for us to use the siwak, the miswak, during our fast, the question is it okay to brush our teeth? Because it has the same function. And so over here, this is where you have an issue coming up. On one hand, it's very similar to the siwak. You're brushing your teeth. And that's what you do with that twig as well. But the way it's different is that when you use toothpaste or any other ingredient, whether it's a paste or whether it's powder, then the scholars, some of them, they said that this would be like chewing gum. If you chew gum or something that actually will will dissolve in your mouth. They say that this is haram to use because you are potentially going to break your fast. And so they say it's not permissible for you to chew your gum, for example. And if it gets to the back of your throat, in that case, we would say not only is it something haram that you had done in chewing that gum, but you also broke your fast. So now here is the issue. When it comes to brushing your teeth with toothpaste, are you going to say that it's similar to the siwak, to the miswak, wherein it doesn't break your fast? Or is it like chewing gum, where the juices and the saliva actually mixes in with the ingredients and it actually gets into the back of your throat, into your stomach, in which case it would break your fast. And so over here, if you're just using the toothbrush with water, there's no difference of opinion that insha'Allah, your fast is fine. You can brush your teeth just with water and you can even rinse it out because you're not adding any ingredient in there. But when it comes to the toothpaste, you have certain scholars like Ibn Baz rahimahullah and Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah. They said that this is like the siwak, and so it's allowed for you to do so and it won't break your fast. And there are other scholars, they said that this would be like chewing gum or even certain miswaks that you can find that are flavored. You can find lemon flavored, mint flavored siwak or miswaks. They say even this would be something that is impermissible for you to use. And if you taste the ingredient or the menthol or whatever it is in the back of your throat, it invalidates your fast. So over here we see that there is a difference of opinion because it is a contemporary issue. And with contemporary issues, you will find that there are scholars who have an opinion going one way or the other. And so in this case, to protect our fast, and in line with the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, to leave off that which we have doubt of for something that we have no doubt of, we should try to avoid using toothpaste in this case. Wallahu a'lam. Now, when it comes to other things such as the inhalers, people who have asthma, they use inhalers. Is this something that's allowed or not? The main ingredients in an inhaler normally are water, oxygen, and some medical ingredients. And when you look at the cartridge, the whole puffer is around 10 milliliters. 10 milliliters means it's tiny. It's very little. And each inhaler actually has 200 puffs that you can make. So just imagine if the whole thing is 10 milliliters and each puff is only 0.5% of that, you can imagine that there's barely anything that will actually get into you. And it's actually going into your lungs and not into your stomach. In the same way that when you gargle and when you rinse your nose, there are traces of water that do enter, but that amount Allah Azza wa Jal has forgiven us for. Because when we pray, we do wudu. When we do wudu, we gargle and we also rinse our nose. Obviously, we don't rinse it the way that we do outside of Ramadan, but we still are doing it. And so it tells us that if that amount is allowed, insha'Allah, even the trace amounts that might go in when we use the inhaler, that too, insha'Allah, will be fine. And it's only a presumption that there are actually some vapor, some tiny bits of a vapor that get into the stomach. It's not something that we can say for certain. And so as long as there's no certainty, insha'Allah, our fast is valid. In the same way that we also use the miswak, the siwak, and there are chemical ingredients within that twig that when we use it, we are allowed to swallow whatever saliva is formed around it. We don't suck on it, but anything that goes in, that is something that is forgiven. So when it comes to the toothbrush, we said, insha'Allah, there are no issues with that. With the toothpaste, it's better to avoid it because you have certain scholars who will say that it's similar to chewing gum, which does break your fast. And so you want to protect your fast. And there are others who said it's just like you using the miswak. Now, inshallah, we're going to have Sheikh Kamil talk a bit about ventilators. And, this is something of a concern for people who might be in hospitals, especially in our times right now. They may need the ventilator to breathe, and it might be, they have a tough time breathing. So even though they need that oxygen, they can still leave off eating and drinking, and they don't need to take any medicines. So in this case, Sheikh Kamil, can you tell us what the ruling would be in both instances, in the instances of where the ventilator does have water that is used, and in the case of ventilators that don't have any water added to it?
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Concerning ventilators, first of all, those who require it are those who are critically ill. And as such, they would be in hospitals. And I would imagine that such people would probably need other medications as well throughout the day. And they would probably also be given IVs or other things to give them nutrition, etc. So if that is the case, then such people are excused from fasting. As we mentioned last week, there are certain people who do not have to fast, and they are, among them are the sick, the ill, and the critically ill as well. And such people, if they get cured later on, then they have to make up the days that they missed. But now, if there is someone who can fast, but he's having a problem breathing, and so he requires a ventilator, then this is a different issue. Mm-hmm. Here now we're talking about a fasting person who is fasting, or for example, let's say he started his day fasting, and then later on in the day he had problem breathing, he was admitted to the hospital, and he doesn't want to break his fast. Maybe there's an hour left, and he has to take the ventilator. This is now a necessity. So this is where we look at the different kinds of ventilators. Those ventilators where the oxygen is being given through this mask, that does not include any ingredients, any liquids. There's absolutely no problem with using such ventilators. It does not invalidate the fast.
So this is just oxygen going into your lungs. And so this would just be like you breathing normal air, but there's just a higher concentration of oxygen for it to get to your lungs.
Yeah.
Right? Regardless of whether it's through your nose or through your mouth. I think the only issue here would be if you're taking it through your mouth. Mm-hmm. And there was something else added to it, like water.
Yeah. So the second kind is ventilators where liquid substances are added to the ventilator and to the oxygen. Here, once again, this would be similar to asthma inhalers, where the amount that a person is breathing in is very, very small and a very inconsiderable amount. And such amounts do not break the fast. And so if it's a very, very small amount, where is it going? Just like you said, it's going into the lungs and nothing is going into the stomach. However, if a person has a ventilator and there's liquid substances being added and he feels that something is gathering up in his mouth, liquid, he should not swallow that, but rather he should spit it out.
Okay. So basically the issue here is not that there's some foreign thing going in, because all it is the oxygen that's in the air, you're unable to breathe that in, so there's a higher concentration of that same oxygen that you would normally breathe in, and that's going into your lungs and you're breathing out the way that you normally would. And with regards to if it was through your mouth or if there was water added to it as well, then if it gets collected in your mouth, if there is something pulling up in your mouth, you would spit that out. And I think another thing that would clarify this for us is some of us, or some people, they actually live in coastal towns. And the air there is very humid. And so at times you cannot actually imagine it being more humid. That air that they're breathing in there is more humid than perhaps the what they're breathing in through this. And so since the purpose behind it is not for them to be drinking water, and it's going into their lungs, and it's only presumed that it might go into their stomach. Over here we will say that based on the principle that if you are certain of something, uncertainty cannot abrogate that ruling. We know that for a fact we are fasting. And so this would be an uncertainty, correct?
Yeah.
And so we would say that this is something that does not break our fast. Now, would we say that this is the same as someone who smokes cigarettes? Because over here, it's not the same anymore. There's also carbon that's going in. There's also bits of tobacco that are perhaps going in, and it's actually substance that goes in and perhaps even settling in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that you need. So can you talk a bit about the use of cigarettes in this case?
Yeah. With regards to smoking cigarettes, cigarettes are actually, by agreement of all scholars, haram. Smoking cigarettes is haram to begin with. But now if a person does it while fasting, once again, the scholars all agree. They all agree that it invalidates the fast. And this is because a person intentionally inhales smoke. And scholars from all the four madahib have mentioned.
From all four schools of thought.
From all four schools of thought.
From the beginning of Islamic, basically, study.
Yeah, they all agree that whoever intentionally inhales smoke, any kind of smoke, he intentionally goes up to smoke and inhales it.
So we're not talking about cigarettes, we're even talking about wood that you burn for fragrance. You're not allowed to go there and intentionally sniff that in. Because it has some substance in there that also goes in. So
this is why smoking invalidates the fast.
Jazakallah khair. Now, Sheikh Nu'man, when it comes to other medical procedures, or for example, you go to the doctor for a checkup, you have a tummy ache, you have pain in your stomach, or it could be elsewhere. Sometimes the doctors need to take a peek. In those instances, can you talk a bit about what happens in those instances? Would it invalidate your fast if the doctor uses something like a scope, or?
So when it comes to such medical procedures, there's usually an introscopy that occurs, which is when a medical instrument is inserted into any part of the body from any orifice, right? To examine that part of the body. So you have gastroscopies to examine the stomach, endoscopies, and etc. The general principle that is ascertained from the Quran and the Sunnah is that anything nutritious, if put into the body, will break your fast. So over here, what's being put into the body, if it's not nutritious, if there's nothing going into the body that is nutritious, it will not break your fast. So if there's no lining of amino acids or a fatty layer to make it easier for the tube to travel into your body to examine if there's an ulcer or anything else, then it will not break the fast. If there is a lining of amino acids or a fatty substance, then it will break your fast because that is nourishing in nature.
So basically, because it's going into your body.
Yes.
And it might be a gel, it might be an ointment.
Yes.
And it is going into, for example, especially if it's through the mouth, and inshallah we can talk about this principle at the end, that there are certain pathways that you would say are the conventional pathways into your body, and then there are the non-conventional. So in the conventional, if something's going in, and so now over here we're saying that there's gel that's surrounding it, your body will absorb that.
Yes,
so we're saying that over here in this case, you either delay that, the examination
later onwards,
or if it's a necessity, you get it done, but you make up for that day. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Now, the other issue as well is the use of nasal drops. Some people, they might have allergies or they have a lot of nasal congestion, or it could be anything. Maybe they're taking it for other medical purposes and may take nasal drops. Now, these nasal drops, do they break a person's fast?
So, in regards to nasal drops, it's the same principle, which is that if it enters the body, as you mentioned, through one of the general orifices, like the nose or the mouth, and it will enter into the body. So the likelihood of it going into your mouth and into your digestive tract is likely, which is usually the case, then it will break your fast.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a special type of drop that does not enter into the system, into the digestive tract, then it will not break your fast.
So the main point here is, because the nose and the mouth, basically they both lead to the throat,
Right.
and it will enter into your body. If you're taking drops in there, and it, obviously over here we're talking about someone who needs to do that, right? Someone who doesn't need to do that, we would say it's impermissible for them to do so. They're sinful for doing so, right? But in the case of someone who needs to do so, if they taste something, or if they feel that whatever drop they put in, they can feel that it's reached the back of their throat and into down their esophagus, then over here we would say that their fast has been invalidated, and they need to make up the fast. Now, one thing that needs to be kept in mind is that in all these cases, they're still required to continue their fast if they're able to do so. If they're healthy, they're still required to complete the fast, and they still have to make up for this day, right? Because just because you did one of the nullifiers of the fast doesn't give you the green light to now do all the nullifiers of the fast or to repeat within those nullifiers.
Yeah, out of respect for the holy month and for the other believers who are fasting. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. Now, another thing that might be similar to this would be nasal sprays, right? So now, in the case of nasal sprays that are like the nasal drops, where they go in and into your, down your throat, then we would say that it has the same ruling, that you should not use it because it would invalidate your fast. But then certain times, for example, people who use inhalers that we said is permissible to use, inshallah, they're unable to use it properly, and so they use these chambers, right? And so those chambers are connected, and it might actually be going through their nose as well. So inshallah, in this case, that shouldn't be a problem, right? If it's just the inhaler, and it's the same thing as the inhaler that you were taking in through your mouth, you're taking it through your nose. In this case, it would have the same ruling.
As long as the same conditions are met, where it's not nourishing or...
Jazakallah khair. Now, when it comes to eye drops, we will see that traditionally, and I think one thing that we need to also realize is that a lot of times when scholars in the past might have spoken about certain things, for example, the eye being connected to the rest of your, to the nose and throat, or the ears being connected to that. So they said if you take in eye drops, it will end up down your throat, or if you take ear drops, it will end up going down your throat. I think what we need to do is these kind of things, we need to see what actually happens. And now, if there is medical knowledge that shows that it's not connected, then we could say that inshallah, in this case, both of these, they should be fine, right? There are certain individuals who do have certain ducts that connect to that. So in this case, obviously, and this is very few people, right? These people should avoid it. And the same thing when it comes to eardrops as well. If someone has an ear infection, unless their eardrum is,
The eardrum is ruptured.
is ruptured, unless the eardrum is ruptured, we would say that, inshallah, it's fine to use the drops because it's not going to end up into the throat area and down your stomach.
Again, with the same condition if it's not nourishing. If it's nourishing in nature and it enters the blood.
Yeah, so everything, inshallah, we can talk about. We're going to talk about, I think, a couple of principles towards the end. And those relate to the pathways. Are they conventional or are they non-conventional? And the other major thing for us to see would be, are they something that is nourishing or not nourishing? Now, when we had covered the nullifiers of fasting last week, we had also mentioned hijama, which is wet cupping. Dry cupping is fine, right? But when it comes to wet cupping, in one of the schools, they said, based on the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, that the one who performs hijama, the one who performs wet cupping, and the one who got it done, that their fast has been invalidated. They have actually done one of the nullifiers of the fast. And so we had said that to be on the safe side, even though it's not the majority opinion, one should stay away from it while they're fasting because it does weaken you, right? Now, if we take the same principle of blood being extracted, would we say that if you got blood taken out from you for a blood test, or if you had something like if you wanted to donate blood, would that fall under the same category?
Basically, blood leaving the body, all we have is the evidence from that hadith concerning hijam, that this invalidates the fast.
Now, is this something where we know what the reasoning is, or have certain scholars speculated what the reason might be for the fast to be invalidated? Because there's nothing going into our body.
Yeah, basically, they said that it weakens the person.
It weakens a person, so they're in a weaker state, and it makes their fast tougher for them.
Yeah, it would affect their fast.
And others, they said that this is something that they would, in Arabic, they would say, Amr ta'abudi. We can't understand what the reasoning behind it was. Allah Azza wa Jal knows best, but we follow what Allah told us to. So based on the speculation that it weakens you, and that's the reason for it invalidating your fast, we would say that something like blood donation.
Yeah, so when it comes to, in today's day and age, releasing blood from your body, there are mainly two kinds. One is blood donation, and this invalidates the fast because you're releasing a lot of blood from your body. So we would do qiyas, we would basically compare it to hijama.
To wet cupping.
Yeah, and so it would take the very same ruling. So blood donation, it invalidates the fast.
So one should, to be on the safe side, try to avoid doing it during their fast. Do it either outside of the hours of a fast or do it after Ramadan.
Yeah. The other kind is basically blood sampling. You need your blood examined, and so the doctor will, he'll basically take a sample of your blood. This does not invalidate the fast, simply because the amount coming out is very small.
So it wouldn't really affect you. It wouldn't make you tired. It wouldn't cause exhaustion. It wouldn't make it tougher for you to fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in the case of the opposite now, instead of things coming out of your body, you are injecting something into your body. Now, obviously, I realize that there would be multiple forms of this, right? Multiple scenarios. One might be you just taking an injection that's going subcutaneously. It's just going into your fat layer, or it's going into the muscle. And the other would be it's going into your veins, IVs, right? So can you talk a bit about the injections, inshallah? And inshallah we'll have Sheikh Kamil talk about the IV. The injections, if you take an injection, for example, you took a shot for a flu shot, or the different types of shots that are out there.
So again, establishing the main principles that you were mentioning and that Sheikh Kamil mentioned, it would break fast if it was nourishing in nature. So if it provided any hormone or any sort of
energy,
macro molecule or of any sort. So adding to your system, changing your internal state, right? This would invalidate your fast, whether it be a sort of hormone drug or whether it be a macro molecule of any sort.
Now, can you dumb it down for people like myself who...
So any sort of blood transfusion will carry such substances within the blood, and hence it would break fast.
So blood transfusions would not be allowed in the state of fasting unless you need to get it done, in which case we say you get it done,
and then
but it broke up the fast, and you make up the fast
later
on a later date. In the case of a flu shot, that we would say
flu shots do not contain.
They do not contain something that would be nutritious to you, and it's going into the layer of the. It's basically subcutaneous. It's going into the muscle. Or it's going into the fat. So inshallah, that is fine as well. Now, when it comes to something like the IV, what about that?
Yeah, so basically, IVs are different, completely different, because these shots are going into your veins. And basically what modern medicine has discovered is that anything going into your veins provides nutrition to your body, or anything that you are giving into your bloodstream, it provides nutrition to the body.
So we're talking about over here the IV fluid that, for example, we're not talking about how people will add antibiotics or, painkillers into that, but we're talking about the IV fluid when you go to the hospital if you're feeling weak, or if you had surgery and you were unable to eat or something like that, you have, an IV line going into you, and that is basically nourishing you.
Yeah.
In this case, we would say?
Yeah, so this would invalidate the fast, because it basically takes the place of food and drink. So although you're not eating and drinking, you're getting nourishment through a secondary way, but the result is the exact same.
And I believe people, they can go months and years just on IV. People might be in a coma.
Yeah, many people do.
And people, they might be in a coma, and for years, they might just be getting nutrition through the IV. They're not eating anything. They're not drinking anything. And so this should be a very clear indication that it is something that breaks your fast, because you are providing nutrition to yourself. Now, when you go in for surgery, it's possible that you won't be given an IV. It might be a small procedure. And at the same time, whether it's because of the pain that you're going to get, or it might be because they want you to be completely still, or whatever the case may be, you might have to go through, they might have you under anesthesia. What would happen in that case?
Yeah, so basically anesthesia, there are different kinds. One kind is, we can say basically there are two main kinds. One is what they call regional anesthesia, where a certain part of your body is drugged.
Just the local area, local anesthesia.
Yeah. So, your leg, your arm, etc. The second kind, and so this kind, it does not invalidate the fast, because you're not receiving nutrition. They're not putting any nourishment into your body.
They're just blockers.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
Yeah,
right?
and they're not going into the bloodstream. The second kind is the general anesthesia, where your entire body needs to be drugged, and this includes your mind. And so such a person, when he is in this general anesthesia, he loses consciousness. He loses consciousness.
So, this would be very similar then to what we had spoken about in the last session about a person who lost consciousness. And so over here, would the same things apply as well, wherein we said that if a person is conscious for even a part of the day, and they had made the intention to fast before Fajr, and they had consciousness for any part of the day, whether it's the beginning, middle, or the end, we had said that this person's fast would be valid. But someone who was knocked out for the duration of the fasting period, we had said that this person's fast would not be valid, because he didn't have the intention during the act of worship. Would we say something similar in this case?
Yes, it takes the same ruling. And so a person who does not have consciousness, he's not required to fast. But this is a person who doesn't have consciousness throughout the day.
Jazakallah khair. So I think there are a couple of principles that we can perhaps derive from all these rulings that we have spoken about. When we're studying fiqh, when we're studying Islamic law, what's very helpful is for us to establish principles based on the different things that the Prophet ﷺ has told us, or what are available in the Quran in terms of legal rulings. And we see that there are general trends, and we can make principles based on that. And what this does for us is, when there's a new issue that comes up, we can utilize these principles to determine the ruling for that new thing. And so I think in this case, we can say that there are certain principles that we can have. Can you talk about one of them, and inshallah we will have Sheikh Norman talk about the other?
Yeah, so one of the principles concerning what breaks your fast and what does not break your fast, because there are so many new things, contemporary things that we have today, and what we have covered today is nothing compared to the amount of things out there today where people have questions. Does this break my fast or not? Today we've just covered some of the more common ones. So what makes it easy for us, what will make it easy for us to understand what breaks your fast and what doesn't, is to take this principle, that anything that enters your body through the conventional ways, or that reaches the stomach through the conventional way, then this breaks the fast irrespective of whether it provides you nourishment or not. So a conventional pathway to the stomach is your mouth and nose.
So it doesn't have to be nutritious.
Yeah.
If, for example, something came up,
and the condition is it's intentional.
It's intentional. So if you're walking in the street and a fly goes in through your mouth,
then that's
fine.
Yeah.
And I think the other important thing to mention here before, inshallah, we allow Sheikh Kamil to continue, is, for example, if you had gotten sick and you went unconscious and the paramedics came, or you were taken to the hospital, and they had done something to you while you were not conscious, without your permission, then we would say, for example, if they put some drops into your mouth, or even if there was an IV or anything, we would say that your fast is still valid because you didn't intend for that to happen. You didn't do it, so inshallah you're good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so intention is very, very important.
So it has to be something that is intentional, not something that is accidental.
Yeah.
And so, and we shouldn't be confused between two separate things. One is intentional, and one is out of forgetfulness. You can do something intentionally, but you forgot that you were fasting. Right? So over here we're saying intentionally. For example, you were just walking and something went down your throat. Or you lost consciousness and the paramedics came, and just to, they were giving you first aid or whatever else was going on, and they dropped some drops into your throat. We would say that your fast is fine. Going back to the principle. So you're saying that if there's anything that you do intentionally and it's going through one of the two conventional pathways into your stomach, whether it's the nose or the mouth, regardless of whether it's nutritious or not, for all, like if you really want to exaggerate this just to make the point clear, you could even say someone swallows pebbles, right? We would say that this invalidates the person's fast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because it's going through the normal, the conventional way into the stomach.
Okay.
That's the first. Besides the conventional pathways to the stomach, you have nowadays other ways where things are going into the body, non-conventional pathways. So here we don't look at, here all we look at is whether it is nourishing or not. So if this is nourishing, it's providing your body nourishment, then this breaks the fast. And if it does not provide it with nourishment, then it does not break your fast, inshallah. And this principle is basically what we have applied. All the examples, all the things that we mentioned today, if you notice, we've constantly been mentioning, this provides nourishment, this does not, therefore this breaks the fast and this does not. So that makes it very, very easy for us to understand, inshallah ta'ala.
So going back to the nourishment point, and whether it's not, and even like what he said about the conventional pathways, we had said the inhaler is fine. That's going through your mouth or through your nose. How do we say that then? Is it because it's going into your lungs and not into your stomach, and that it's just like breathing air?
So it comes back to the concept of nourishment in the textual scripture that we have, right? Which is anything that provides energy, right? Even though technically inhalers provide steroids to the body to calm the lungs and the muscles and the alveoli, so that your breathing comes back to normal, it has not provided technical nourishment according to the Sharia.
And it's going into your lungs and not to your stomach. Right?
I mean, it does enter your blood flow in a particular area, but it doesn't enter the whole
Yeah, so it's
body,
not going
right?
into the place where normally we would say, nourishment goes into your stomach.
Yeah.
This would be kind of like something that you're breathing in.
And also, at the end of the day, it's not providing nourishment. That's the key point, right? Because even though it is providing a drug, a steroid to the system, to your body, to calm and relax your lungs so that you can breathe easily.
Yeah, no, we're not talking about that because this is a conventional path.
Yeah.
That's why we don't really look at the nourishment part.
Yeah.
But over here, we would say because it's going into the lung,
Yeah.
if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Right? But in the case of someone who smokes cigarettes, or why did we say that is not allowed? Because we would say that falls under the principle of it going into your body, something that has substance, and it went in through one of the conventional pathways, and the scholars would liken this to smoke, and inhaling that intentionally would break your fast, correct?
Yeah.
And under that same principle of it being nourishing or not nourishing, we had said that certain things such as the flu shot, for example, a flu shot, for example, would not
break your fast.
Would not break your fast. But something else, could you give us an example of something that would break your fast?
Like blood transfusions or like purposely taking drugs in different manners, right? Yeah, so these things would break your fast.
Alhamdulillah. So obviously, as Sheikh Kamil, he mentioned, we won't be able to cover everything that is out there, because some people, they also have this contention. They will say that we have made religion more tough than it needs to be. Why are we talking about these different issues? And I think the response to this is that the more our lives get complicated, we complicate our own lives. All the Sharia tries to do, all that Islam tries to do, is it provides us with the answers in that complicated life that we have established for ourselves. Those who lead simple lives, they don't have complicated issues. But those who lead complicated lives, they're going to have to deal with these intricacies, and they're going to want to know what the answers are to that. So it's not really that we're making Islam tough for anyone. It's just that we're trying to answer questions, and we're trying to answer or get people out of scenarios that they themselves have put themselves into.
Like a very good example for this is people who use nicotine or caffeine patches, right? That's not something that normal people would do. So there's a hukm for it because
there's a ruling for it.
Yeah, there's a ruling for it in the divine law of Allah, because the law is for all of mankind and for all of your actions, right? So.
Jazakallah khair. So inshallah, with that, we're going to wrap up this portion of today's session, which was dealing with contemporary issues related to fasting. And it brings us to the next portion, inshallah, that we want to spend a bit of time on. And inshallah, we can take any questions as well if anyone has questions. And that is related to this Ramadan potentially being a very different Ramadan. The masjids are closed. They're not open to for the public, for them to come and pray Taraweeh. And a lot of people, they would think that it is Taraweeh that embodies Ramadan for them, right? So over here, I think it's very important for us to discuss certain issues so that we could comfort them, inshallah, and give them solutions in whatever scenario or situation people find themselves in right now. So I think the first question that people would have is, what is the most important act in a Muslim's life in terms of the pillars of Islam that a person must ensure that they do, whether it's in Ramadan or outside of Ramadan?
Without a doubt, the most important outward act of Islam is the second pillar of Islam, which is the Salah.
So after one has testified and basically he bears witness that there's only Allah who deserves to be worshipped and that the Prophet ﷺ is his final messenger and prophet, the most important pillar after this is Salah.
Yeah. And the salah that we mean here are the obligatory salawat.
So the five daily prayers. Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. Because some people, they're getting so flustered by the fact that they won't be able to pray Taraweeh, but they might not even be praying their daily prayers in or out of Ramadan. So over here, I think a very important thing for people to know is more important than the Taraweeh prayer is the prayers that have been made obligatory on you by Allah Azza wa Jalla, these five daily prayers. Then after this, what is the most important pillar of Islam during this month that one does?
Naturally, in chronological order, the next most important would be the fasting of the day of Ramadan.
So fasting the day of Ramadan is more important than the Taraweeh that one prays.
Naturally.
So the fact that the masjids are closed
does not change that the focus of Ramadan is the fast itself. Yes.
Okay. So these are two very key points for us to realize, that which is compulsory, we still do within our homes or wherever we might be, right? In the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was describing some of the virtues of our ummah, of our nation, he said that one of the things that is a special ruling for us, and that wasn't there before, is that all of the whole world is a place for us to pray in. It's not just the masjid that you have to come to and pray. You could be praying anywhere as long as that place is clean and pure. You can pray anywhere. So I think this should give us a lot of happiness and satisfaction that we don't need to come to the masjid to say, oh, our prayer is only valid if we come pray at the masjid. Right?
That's very true.
Now, when it comes to the Taraweeh, can you talk a bit about the Taraweeh? How it was started, and then perhaps Sheikh Norman can talk about what happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah, so basically when Salat al-Taraweeh was first legislated in Islam, it was not legislated as a salah to be prayed in congregation in the masjid. But rather, the Sahaba, they would pray it individually at home.
And this is even outside of Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they would pray tahajjud prayer, right? So anything that you pray after Isha till Fajr, this would fall under this category, correct?
Yeah. And so today, if we don't have our masajid open and we're being forced to pray at home, all we're doing is we're going back to the original legislation, how Taraweeh was originally prayed. It doesn't mean that we're saying you're not allowed to pray in the masjid. What we're saying is that both of these are praying individually at home, praying in the masjid, praying in jama'ah at home. All of these are different ways of praying Salat al-Taraweeh, meaning that Salat al-Taraweeh, there's not one way of praying it in the masjid. No. It is prayed individually. It can be prayed in the masjid. It can be prayed in jama'ah at home.
Okay, so when the Prophet ﷺ first established the Taraweeh, it was in Ramadan, and it was 2 or 3 days that the Prophet ﷺ did so, and then he suddenly stopped. And the reason that the Prophet ﷺ stopped is because he said that he is still receiving revelation from Allah. While the Prophet ﷺ is alive, he's still receiving revelation from Allah. And so he doesn't want something that he's doing that's extra to become compulsory. The logic was, the Prophet ﷺ, he was basically saying that if the Muslims start to pray the Taraweeh as a regular thing, this might be something that gets prescribed by Allah Azza wa Jal as a permanent thing that they must do, as something that's compulsory. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he stopped doing so. And then obviously after that, the Prophet ﷺ passes away, and now we say that that's it. You can't make additions to the religion, you can't make subtractions.
There's no abrogation.
There's no abrogation. And so now Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he's the Khalifa, but he got very busy because of the different trials he was going through. But during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, he saw the opportunity,
Yeah, so Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he saw in many hadith, in the hadith of the Bukhari, in the narrations of the Bukhari, that he saw many of the Sahaba in Medina, in their houses, praying collectively together in small groups. So in their house, and he would cross the streets of Medina. So he said, you know what? Everyone's already praying, congregation. Why don't we all congregate together in the masjid and pray? And this is where the tradition of praying tarawih together formulated. Yeah.
So it's not an innovation. Some people, they will say that this is a proof that innovation in religion is fine. We would say that he's going back to something that the Prophet ﷺ himself established,
Exactly.
but then he paused from, just so that it doesn't get enforced upon us as an obligation.
Exactly.
And now that the Prophet ﷺ, he has passed away, now there is no fear of it becoming an obligation. So now he's bringing that back.
He's bringing it back.
Because even when it wasn't taking place in the masjid, people could still congregate within their homes and pray with their families.
And they were.
And they were.
And they were. Yeah. So.
Okay. So now the next question is, if Taraweeh is something that is not compulsory, it's still something that we should try to do, right? Because the whole point of Ramadan is fasting, attaining taqwa through fasting. It is to recite the Quran because the Quran was revealed in this month as well, and we should be reciting it regardless of whether it's Ramadan or not. But in this month, we see that there was an extra emphasis put on the recitation of the Quran by the Prophet ﷺ and the companions who came as well, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever fasts the month of Ramadan with Iman and seeking the reward from Allah, Allah will forgive his previous sins. In the same way, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever stands in the night prayer with Iman and seeking the reward from Allah, Allah will forgive their previous sins. So it's something that we should try to do, but it's not something that's compulsory. The reason we went on this tangent talking about the Taraweeh is for us to know that the more important aspects of Ramadan are actually praying your 5 daily prayers on time, and fasting, making sure that your fasts are valid.
And to further add that if you were to further beautify and perfect your fasting, this would naturally follow up with you adding on to it to beautify it with Quran and zikr and prayer. And this would lead to you praying Taraweeh at home, whether it be in congregation or by yourself. So in perfecting your fast, you would be achieving what you would have achieved in congregation, because the lack of the communal aspect of Ramadan does not entail that you can't develop that spiritual closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by yourself at home.
So even if someone were to pray at home, not in the masjid, they're not praying Taraweeh at home, they're not praying in the masjid, they're praying at home, will they also fall under this category that the Prophet ﷺ, the one he mentioned, that the one who stands in prayer during this month with Iman and seeking the reward, they shall have their sins forgiven?
Yeah, of course, without a doubt. Because the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith, he did not specify that such a person is praying in jama'ah in the masjid. But
in fact, as we said, he stopped doing that after 2 or 3 days. He actually stopped doing that. Now, the question that people have then is, how do we perform these prayers at home? Because they haven't, for many people, they might not have done this before. They're not used to performing the night prayer at home. Now, obviously, you can either pray in congregation or by yourself. But how do you go about it? Is it 1 rak'ah? Is it 2 rak'ahs? Is it 3?
So, any prayer that is a voluntary prayer, the rule that's taken from the hadith of Aisha and from the many other hadith of Prophet is that it's mathna. It is two. So it's 2 units.
It's prayed in pairs, 2 rak'ahs.
It's prayed in 2 units. So you pray 2 units, and then you
say salam,
and then you pray 2 units, and so on, right?
And the exception to this would be witr.
The exception to this is witr, where you can pray it 1 unit,
1,
or 3
3,
units,
5,
or 5
7,
units,
9.
or however many.
But to keep things simple for people, you pray 2 units the same way that you would normally pray Fajr.
Yeah, precisely.
Right? Yeah. And then you would say salam, and then you start another 2 units of prayer, And then you say salam.
And to add to that, you can say, for instance, you don't know much Quran and you only know the small surahs. Like it's well known that the two schools of fiqh, of the Hanabila and the Shafi'iyya, allow reading from the Mus'haf in prayer.
Inshallah, we'll get to that. But
Yeah.
before we get to that,
Yeah.
it's also possible for people, whatever they've memorized, for them to repeat that constantly, right? There are many people who, and we know this from the Salaf, we know this from the generation that came after the Sahaba, we know that they would sometimes spend the whole night reciting one verse. They would be so engrossed in that verse, and they would be crying and sobbing over that verse, that the whole night would be spent reciting that verse. So we can repeat the surah multiple times, right?
And we have examples of like other scholars like Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah, the Hanbali scholar, who would pray 200 units of voluntary prayer with the two mu'awwidhatain in Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Ikhlas.
So the first thing for people to realize is, in this time, don't try to do anything that the scholars have said is not valid. Try to stick with that which you know is valid for sure, even if it seems like it's repetitive. For example, you are hearing some very funny things coming out now. Some people, they say that perhaps we can listen to the Quran online as other people are praying Taraweeh, and we can just follow that at home. And this is not just for Taraweeh. Some people also said this for the Jumu'ah Salah. Of course, for the Jumu'ah Salah, it's an even bigger issue for them to say this, because the Friday congregational prayer is something that is not something that's voluntary. And so if you're praying the Jumu'ah in this way that is invalid, you're not praying the Zuhr Salah that would be valid in that case. And so you haven't fulfilled that covenant. You haven't prayed that prayer. And so you can get punished. You will get punished for that. But in the case of Taraweeh as well, instead of doing that, and all the fiqh bodies, all the bodies of scholars worldwide, they have said that this is not something that is valid. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
And what is the difference between there being a body of scholars and one scholar? For example, you might have one scholar say something, but we might actually feel more comfortable when it's a body of scholars saying something. Why is that?
Because it gives authority, or it gives you certainty concerning that particular issue.
So it would be, for example, there's a doctor out there, and he might be a real doctor. He was a trained doctor, might have gone to the best university, Harvard graduate, and he says, you know what? I have a solution for the coronavirus. You take a glass of water, you put some black pepper in there, and you take that in through your nose. You're going to be cured. That might be one doctor, but you won't find something funny like this coming from a body of doctors. If there's a body that represents doctors, they won't say something like that. Because the first thing is, they are very careful in what they say. And the other thing is, if one is wrong, or two or three have weird opinions, they're not going to overwhelm the majority who might be correct. And the other thing is, the ones who are correct, they can also correct the mistaken doctor. And in this case,
so it produces like an internal
check.
Legal authority in and of itself.
So there's a legal authority and there's like a self-check. You have other scholars who will correct certain mistakes. Maybe you hadn't thought of that thing, and they remind you of that, so then you're content. So we don't have any body of scholars worldwide who have said that this form of prayer is valid, where you're sitting at home and you're following an imam's prayer online, and they might be somewhere else.
Yeah, no worries.
Right?
No worries.
In fact, not only scholarly bodies, but even reputable scholars.
Yeah, so all reputable scholars, they've said the same thing as well.
Yeah.
They've said that this is not something that should be done. And in fact, it's better for us then to do this. We're at home. Even if we only know short surahs. In one rak'ah, in the first rak'ah, we recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And then we recite even whatever surah that we know of. We say it and we go down into ruku', and we do the same in the second rak'ah as well. And we can pray unlimited amounts,
Yes.
right? Aisha radiallahu anha in that hadith, she just said that it's prayed mathna in pairs. It doesn't mean that you have to limit it to 8 or 10 or 20. You could even pray 100 or 200, as you mentioned, the example of a scholar who did that.
And this also gives a unique opportunity to people who are praying voluntary prayers to experience a different type of closeness to Allah, which is through being conscious in every part of prayer. So in regular tarawih, you might get tired by listening to the imam, and you might want to quickly go into ruku' and then sujood, and you're not focusing. But when you're reading very shortly, your focus is on the entirety of the prayer and the du'as you're going to make in sujood, and etc. And you're also making up for the reward that you might have not ascertained, which is the long standing, which is mentioned again and again throughout the prophetic tradition for Ramadan, which is the standing of the night. So effectively, you're getting the reward of the standing of the night if you're praying more units of prayer, right? So you're basically making up for it. You're not really losing anything. Basically.
So the first thing is we can do that. Recite whatever surahs or chapters of the Quran that we know, and if that means we're going to pray multiple units of prayer, that's fine. Or we could even repeat the same surah over and over and over again in one rak'ah until we're satisfied, and each time we can also be contemplating the meaning, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's
But like within that, and the other way would then be, and inshallah this is the second part that we're going to talk about, is reciting from a Quran. Now, as the Sheikh said, the Hanbali and the Shafi'i school, it says that it's permissible for you to recite from the Quran. It doesn't invalidate your prayer, and it's not even makruh, it's not even something that's disliked according to these two schools. Whether it's fard, whether it's a compulsory prayer, or whether it's an optional prayer. The Maliki school, they said that this is something that's disliked. So even then they're saying that it doesn't break your salah. But it's disliked because you're doing movements. You have the Quran and you are focused on having the Quran in your hand, and then you're putting that down, and then you're picking that back up. And so that might busy you from the salah. And so they said it's something that's disliked. And the Hanafi opinion in this, they had said that it's something that invalidates your prayer because they said that this is more than 3 movements. And so in doing so, this would invalidate your prayer. But that still is better than someone who might, for example, say, I want to follow Salah online. Because none of the schools, none of the reputable scholars, none of the bodies of scholars say that it's permissible. And even when it comes to this, we actually find that this was a practice during the time of the Sahaba as well. Aisha radiallahu anha, she would get her slave by the name of Zakwan. He would recite the Quran from a Quran when he would do the night prayer, and she would pray behind him. So we do see this practice taking place amongst the Sahaba, and even after the time of the Sahaba. So over here we will say that, insha'Allah, by the will of Allah, the stronger opinion is that it does not invalidate your prayer, especially when you're doing it for a reason, in your optional prayer. Normally we would say, for example, if you're praying Tarawih in the masjid, would you recommend that people have a Quran that they're following with?
You have examples even now of very big reciters who still read from the Mus'haf if they're not certain of their memory, right? You have many big reciters from the Mediterranean, from the Gulf, from Saudi Arabia, from Riyadh, who read from the Mus'haf.
Who read from the Quran. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we have to remember as well is that the Hanafi school, over here, the reason they said it breaks your salah is not because you're reciting from the Quran, but because of the movements. So if what you can do is have the Quran, if you are very uncomfortable, and you might be a Hanafi and you don't want to take, you just want to stick with that opinion, what you could do is you could have the Quran in front of you so that you're not touching it. And each rak'ah, you recite one page of the Quran that's in front of you. It might be on a pedestal, it might be on a holder. right?
Yeah.
And
You
so
have
that
those
way,
music stands where you
yeah, where you have those stands, you have the Quran placed on it. And then each time you finish a page, you go down into ruku'. So when you finish the two that are in front of you, you end your units of prayer, and then you flip the page outside of salah, and then you continue doing so. And you can do this whether it's in congregation or if you're doing this on your own. So now again, if you were praying normally in the masjid, Taraweeh, and this was a regular Ramadan, we would not encourage you to do this. We would not say that, just be in the back and be following the Imam, because it does actually distract you from that. Some people, they say, we want to get the Quran done as well. We're going to recite with the Imam. But Taraweeh is for praying. It's not for you reciting the Quran. That's what the Imam is doing. You're supposed to be listening to the Imam. And you are also not performing certain sunnahs of the prayer when you're holding the Quran and just trying to follow the Imam in Taraweeh, because instead of having your hands tied, you're actually holding something else. So it's better, it's not something that would invalidate your prayer.
It's also worth mentioning that you're not really getting the reward of reciting the Quran, because reciting the Quran entails that you're moving your lips and your
sound
tongue.
Is coming out.
At the bare minimum, your lips and your tongue is moving, and that's where the reward of reading the Quran. So if you're looking to finish the Quran in Ramadan, this wouldn't qualify for that reward, because the reward you're getting is for the act of worship of prayer.
So the majority of scholars, the Shafi'i opinion, the Hanbali opinion, the Maliki opinion, they would say that your salah is fine if you were to recite from the Quran, even if you were holding it and you're flipping the pages. And especially with these smart devices, it's actually a lot easier now, because you can just, flip through it without creating. Yeah, you don't even need to have a lot of motion. You don't need to do a lot of motions to flip the page and stuff. And in the case of the Hanafi opinion, as I mentioned, if you really want to stick to that, even though it over here to us it seems like it's the weaker opinion, because we also see this practice being done at the time of the Sahaba and those after them, then have a Quran in front of you and you can recite from that. But any of that is better than you trying to, for example, follow something online, a stream online, and stuff like that. So this Ramadan, we had mentioned last week that this Ramadan will also have some pros. There are some positives. Can you talk about a couple of positives that this Ramadan has in just 2 minutes while I look at some questions that we have? Just inshallah, one or 2 minutes. Some positives that you feel that the community should also know, because in everything there is a silver lining, right? So just mention a couple of positives. You mention a couple of positives, inshallah, and then we'll take the question that's here.
So without a doubt, spending Ramadan by yourself at home, you may be looking at it as being something negative, but in reality, the positive in it is that ibadah, your worship is something that is more rewarding and more fruitful when it's done in seclusion.
Because you don't have that fear of you being the show off or you doing something for other than Allah. It's between you and Allah.
And basically, you're secluding yourself with Allah. There's nobody else around. This will now strengthen your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is an opportunity to strengthen your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This goes whether it be with regards to Salat al-Taraweeh, whether it be recitation of the Quran, even giving in charity. When we were in the masajid, some people, when it came time for donations, we would have fundraisers and you would publicly give your donation. But now that we'll be at home, there'll be opportunity to give donations, but from the privacy of your own home, where you would give your donations online and nobody else would know. And without a doubt, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. To worship Allah with the intention that we're trying to please Allah and nobody else.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Nu'man, just a couple of positives that you feel that this Ramadan will have if it ends up being the way we believe it will be.
So from one of the silver linings of this Ramadan would definitely be, as Sheikh Kamil mentioned, the personal, private relationship that you can build upon with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also working with your family to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So where generally speaking you would be busy with work and fasting and being tired and coming home for iftar and quickly going for taraweeh and whatever else, you're so busy, you would practically, you're going to work and you're trying to work with your relationship with Allah. There's no time to work with your family or your close ones to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no time to learn more about Allah and His divine attributes and His perfection and how to relate to Allah and how to get closer to Him. So right now would be a very good time to go through parts of the Quran, through reflections and tafsir of the Quran with your family, so that you're working together collectively to get closer to Allah. So yes, you might not have the community collectively, but you have your family and you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every shape and form.
Jazakallah khair. And I think the other thing that we also need to highlight is most people, they have a lot more free time now than they did before this, because many of them, they're working from home. Some may have lost their job, which is, we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to help and aid them. But there are also positives in this. Now they have more time to spend with the Quran, with the prayer, with dua. And so they're not going out to malls, they're not going out to parks, they're not doing all this. Just make sure that you take advantage of this time that you have gained. And so I think that inshallah, there are many positives in this, even though we hope that all this, inshallah, things go back to normal, the masajid are open and we're back with our community. But even this, subhanAllah, this shows us that this religion is in fact for all of time, for every place, till the day of judgment. Because regardless of what situation we're in, our deen, our religion has let us know how we're supposed to deal with the different situations. Nothing happens without the will of Allah. Allah wills for it to happen, and He wants to see how we're going to perform with these set of circumstances that we have now. And so we have to take the opportunity, inshallah, to do the best with it. There are a couple of questions. The first is, can we pray Jumu'ah prayer in Jama'ah at home, or should we just pray Dhuhr Salah? Because we're out of time, I'll quickly just answer this. That setting where you're praying at home, according to all schools, according to all scholars, unless you're taking a condition from here or a statement of a scholar from there and this and that, and you're just trying to do a mix and match mashup, your salah would not be valid in that point. It's better for you to just pray dhuhr at home. That is a salah, that is a prayer that is certain to be accepted by Allah. Pray dhuhr at home. If you pray Jumu'ah at home, according to the majority of scholars, in fact, all the scholars, reputable scholars, they would say that unless, again, going back to the number and all, but under a normal situation where there are just 2 or 3 people or 4 people in the household and they're trying to pray Salatul Jumu'ah, the Jumu'ah congregational prayer at home, they would say that that would not be a valid salah. And it's not even, you're not being asked to do it either. So why risk being sinful and having something or performing something that is not accepted when Allah has now given you the alternative, which is to pray the regular dhuhr that you would pray every other day of the week. And that for sure is guaranteed to be accepted. The other question was about smoking. We had said that inhaling smoke and, for example, smoking cigarettes, that is something that breaks your fast. What about when people do barbecues and they cook food? We would say that that is not intentional, right? If they're cooking if they're barbecuing something, they should try to stay away from the smoke, and whatever goes in, you know, based on their, even despite their attempts of not allowing that to go in, then inshallah that is fine, because that wasn't intentional. And in the case of, for example, when someone cooks in the house and that smell does not break your fast. In fact, sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we have like the Maliki school, which is a lot of the steam and the... Yeah,
but no one's going to be on top of the pot in that way. But we're talking about there's food that's being cooked, and there's, you know, vapors in the air and that smell goes in.
Yeah, I know.
That doesn't invalidate your fast. In fact, the scholars have said that when someone is cooking food while they're fasting, even though it's preferred that they don't, they can still just take a bit just to see if it needs more salt or the spices are fine, just to apply it to the tongue, and they don't ingest it. They spit it out. They make sure that they don't ingest it, but even that would be something that doesn't break their fast.
We have a hadith also that clearly indicating that it's permissible for a cook to do.
Because they say that the mouth is actually from the outside part of your body. It's not from the inside. It's when it gets past the throat that it would be considered part of the insides of your body. So as long as it's out here, it wouldn't break your fast. But once it goes down, that's where it would invalidate the fast. So alhamdulillah, I'd like to thank the two sheikhs. They came all the way from Guelph and from Scarborough. Jazakumullahu khair for the time and for your effort. May Allah Azza wa Jal reward you immensely. And may Allah Azza wa Jal reward you guys as well for attending this session. We had mentioned that these tend to be more boring because they're more academic. It's not like a fun session. We're learning things, but we're learning essential things for our fast. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to reward us as well. If there are any other questions, you may put that inshallah, and perhaps the administration will get us that questions and we can answer them in the comments later on. And we hope that we have a blessed Ramadan. Allah gives us the life to live through Ramadan, and He gives us a lot of barakah. He gives us a lot of mercy in this month as well. He makes us from those who are forgiven in this month, and makes us from those who take advantage of this month, and who makes us people who come out from Ramadan better than they were before Ramadan. Do we have any closing statements from either of you? Jazakumullahu khairan, Sheikh Kamil and Sheikh Nu'man. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Anything that we may have said that was incorrect, we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive us. That was from our own faults or from shaitan. Anything that we said that was correct, that was from Allah Azza wa Jal, insha'Allah. And we ask that Allah Azza wa Jal continues to bless us and to give us life. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Stay safe.